Hello everyone and welcome to this evening's Fertility Network UK webinar all about Christmas. I'm Kate from Fertility Network UK and I'm really delighted this evening to be joined by Angela Pericleous-Smith, who's a fertility counsellor and also chair of the British Infertility Counselling Association, and by Kelly Da Silva, who founded the organisation The Dovecot, and Kelly works as patient support coordinator for CARE. This evening we're going to be talking about how to have a happy Christmas, because we know that this can be a really difficult time of the year, and we wanted to be able to give you some suggestions and some tips that might be useful. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel and on the website within the next week or two. We're going to start this evening by me asking Angela and Kelly a few questions, but we really like to hear from you too. So if you have any questions you want to ask, please do just post them in the chat box or in the Q&A, and we'll get round to as many of them as we can. Also, please be reassured that we won't read out your name, just your question, so you are guaranteed complete anonymity if you want to ask anything. Angela, I really wanted to start by talking to you a bit about what it is that actually makes Christmas so difficult. Why is it such a difficult time of year, do you think, when people are trying to conceive?
I think it's really difficult at Christmas time because often how society portrays Christmas, media, social media, is that it's this magical, wonderful time, idealistic, perfect time to spend with families. So as people approach the end of the year, the Christmas time, this perfect idealistic time, without their desired outcome of a family, it makes it incredibly difficult that as a society we have a view that Christmas is about families.
Kelly, is that reflected on the things that you see when you're talking to other patients and in your own personal experience as well?
Yes, definitely. I'd say Christmas is probably one of the most triggering times for patients going through treatment, particularly if there's been losses as well, or failed treatments in the past year, or whenever it's been. It can be a real kind of key milestone. I know when people get those positive pregnancy tests, they start to imagine what life's going to be like, you know, the first Christmases and things like that. So it can be the first for lots of people. And it's also a time where we often think at the beginning of the new year, you know, hopefully by Christmas we'll be pregnant or have a baby. So again, it's just one of those times where I think there's lots and lots of reminders for people.
Thanks. Angela, I wanted to ask you a bit, because I know that one of the things that people really often say to us is that there are lots of sort of family events and parties and things like that that they often find really, really difficult, because they feel that they can't not go to things, but at the same time they know that there will be things where there will be babies and young children, pregnant people, or where there will be a lot of questions about, oh, when are you going to get round to having a family then? I mean, what would you say to people about those kind of events that they feel that they can't get out of?
Well, firstly, I would say give yourself some self-compassion. Don't push yourself too hard. It is really difficult. It is difficult being around friends, families, people asking those questions. If you genuinely feel you can't go, it's okay not to go. And I would say don't feel pressured that you have to tell a white lie about it as well. It's okay to remember that you don't have to push yourself further than you're willing to or want to. If you do feel that you really, really must go, I think there's something about trying to reframe the situation in your mind and remembering it's not those children that you want or that baby, that pregnancy, but it's actually your own child, your own family.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, actually, isn't it? Kelly, I just wondered from your perspective, what you felt about the sort of guilt that people often feel, because I know that's one of the really big things about not going to things or turning things down. And how would you advise people to kind of deal with that?
I think it's about being having that self-care and compassion. It's a really tricky time going through fertility treatment. It's well recognised that it's can be quite traumatic for people. So I think, in terms of the guilt, it is about putting yourself first and thinking about, going back to things you can control and the things you can't, and often not putting yourself in those situations when you know that you're going to have to put a front on and it's going to be triggering, then so I think it's about putting yourself first, giving yourself that compassion, and as if you were speaking to your own best friend is quite good advice too.
That's a really important one, because I think we're all much kinder to our best friends than we are to ourselves. And I was wondering, Angela, whether actually in some circumstances COVID actually might be quite useful this Christmas to people.
Yes, I think so. I think that was definitely the case last Christmas, and it appears that we're heading that way this Christmas too. I think that kind of having a reason without those white lies, if you like, that I mentioned, having a reason why you're not engaging with people and being able to, I call it, there's a difference between cocooning and hiding away. And if you can reframe it to your cocooning and self-care as opposed to hiding away, that can be really useful too.
I think that's a really lovely word, actually, cocooning, for what people might be doing at Christmas. One of the other things that comes up sometimes is the idea that people could actually create their own sort of Christmas. And I wondered, Kelly, what kind of things you might advise people to think about doing to make your own slightly different Christmas, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think creating your own traditions is really quite a lovely thing to do. We imagine that Christmas is going to be a certain way, and if it's not happened yet, then there's that opportunity and space to be able to do something a little bit different. Obviously, pre-COVID, it was a little bit easier to get away and have a few days break either side of Christmas, or go away completely if you wanted to. But actually, embracing the bits that make Christmas really magical, whether that's Christmas markets, going to different Christmas events. And if there are the two of you as a couple doing something together, it's okay to have an adult Christmas too. And I really like the idea of what Angela said about, cocooning. It feels like really nurturing thing to do. So yeah, creating your own traditions around Christmas. Something that we've always done is either go away a couple of days before or after Christmas, just to have that space together, to have a bit of a quiet time, and then you kind of feel refreshed and ready to do Christmas.
That's a really lovely idea, actually. Angela, I wonder, picking up on that theme of cocooning and being kind to yourself, because I think that people are often quite hard on themselves when they're trying to conceive. And what sort of advice would you have for people around Christmas about that in particular?
About being hard on themselves whilst trying to conceive. I think, like what Kelly said, really, it's that kind of self-care, self-compassion, really nurturing yourself. And it's okay to choose yourselves what you would like to do rather than what you think you should be doing. And I think the thing I would add as well is it doesn't have to be anything extravagant or an outing or a holiday. It could be simply reading a book or watching a movie set or doing a jigsaw, something for yourself that isn't your usual run-of-the-mill daily life for you, can be really useful. But it's kind of, I always think it's worth, like Kelly said, what would you be saying if it was your best friend? And it is worth reframing it in your mind, as opposed to, we're going to a Christmas market, but why are you going to that Christmas market? For your own self-care, why are you doing that jigsaw? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, Kelly, I wondered if I could just come back to you and ask you, what kind of things do you find that people can do that actually do make a difference? I mean, Andrea talked about some of them, like doing a jigsaw, but are there some things that often make people feel a bit better that maybe this Christmas people might think about doing?
Well, I think little things like putting sparkly things in the house, your fairy lights up, I have fairy lights in my house all year round. I find them lovely. So, just you embrace it. I think it's that finding the joy, because there's a lot of sadness around fertility, particularly if it's not working. So, those small things, like I say, just having a Christmas movie night, something like that, going for walks, something that I'm a big advocate of, the walk and talks that I do, but actually going Christmas morning, often we go for a nice Christmas walk in the morning, again, before Christmas dinner with the family.
Thanks, that's really nice ideas there. Angela, one of the other things that I know people sometimes actually find surprisingly difficult is actually Christmas shopping, because you go to the shops and everything seems focused on kind of families and children. I mean, would you have any sort of advice for people about that? Maybe doing everything online, I suppose.
I'm personally an internet shopper, but again, for me, it's kind of the reframing of it, because, a lot of people do want to avoid shops, markets, town, because they see that as kind of full of families, full of magical adventures. But there's something about the actual reality of that. And is it really as idealistic as that? Or is it about the queues, the crowds, the lots of people? Absolutely fine to do internet shopping to avoid those shops. Late night shopping as well can be really useful to avoid the families, but also the crowds. So things like that, thinking a little bit outside of the box.
Some really good ideas there. Thank you. And I just wanted to say to everyone listening in at the moment, we are really keen to have your questions too. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask Angela or Kelly, do just put them in the chat box or put them in the Q&A, and we'll answer your questions for you as best we can this evening. One of the other things I wanted to ask you both about was about food at Christmas, because we know that lots of people who are going through fertility treatment are kind of, not drinking any alcohol, not having any caffeine, following quite strict diets. And I think Christmas can feel stressful just from the point of view of what am I going to do about that, particularly if you are going to family or friends or something. I mean, Angela, what advice would you have about that?
I think again there's lots of non-alcoholic drinks and cocktails these days in bars, restaurants, pubs. I think it is a very common concern for people about not drinking, but there's also that kind of realism about how many people will want to know what's in your actual drink. Sometimes it might be worth asking your partner or a friend to order who does know the journey you're on. And again, there is also nothing wrong with telling people that you're not drinking just because you're choosing not to drink, as opposed to thinking there's something behind that.
That's a really interesting point, actually, because I think if you're aware that you're not drinking or not eating something, it feels probably much more significant to you than it does to everyone else around you. People probably don't necessarily notice. Is that something you've found at all, Kelly?
Yeah, I think everything feels kind of like you're in the spotlight, and it's everything all you're really thinking about. But I think, saying, the whole designated driver thing is quite a useful if you're just at somebody's house Christmas Day or a Christmas event, that you're the designated driver, because you're not having to lie about it. But it kind of is, it's a good reason not to, if you're not being open or if you're not wanting to share where you are in the journey.
Okay, we have a few questions coming in now. From this one here from someone who's about to start their downregulation drugs for IVF next week, and asks if you've got any tips for managing that through the festivities. Kelly, I might ask you if you've got any thoughts about that at all.
Yeah, I'd say choose a time that's going to be kind of convenient. So often with downreg drugs, you do them at the same time throughout the day or every day. So it's worth thinking about a time that's going to fit and won't be too obvious. But, you know, even with the drugs that are the injections that you have to do, they don't take very long usually. So, you know, just thinking about and planning ahead. So if you are going to have to take medication over Christmas or during Christmas events, and then just trying to plan a little bit around it might be quite useful. So I think in terms of the meds, that would be quite helpful. Just, I guess, again, forward thinking, we don't know how we're going to respond to the drugs as well, with all the hormone changes. So again, it goes back to self-care. It's just, you know, if you're with a partner, or, you know, just saying, you know, I might be up and down, just bear with me. So just being kind of honest, keeping that communication open, I think is quite helpful.
Thanks, Kelly. We've got another question here from someone who's unfortunately their fourth round failed at the weekend. I'm really sorry to hear that. And they're worried about wanting to rely on alcohol to get through Christmas. They say apart from the obvious downsides of this, they've been advised to lose as much weight as possible in order to improve the chances for transfer of their last embryo in late January, and wondered if you had any thoughts on how to keep it moderate with this in mind. Angela, I think I'd come to you with that one, if that's okay.
Okay. I think, again, that for me, kind of self-care, self-compassion. I'm sorry that your fourth round has been unsuccessful. I think kind of try and balance those thoughts. It's okay to have one glass of wine without beating yourself up, or without feeling that you're going to drink the old bottle of wine, and it's not going to put you off course for treatment late in January, but kind of that you know, remembering why you're doing this, why you're not drinking lots, and that kind of self-care, particularly if there's weight to lose as well.
Thanks. We've got another question here from someone who's, I think this is probably a really common thing. So they're really struggling to buy presents for children they know, as anything to do with children is really triggering. And have you got any advice about that? Kelly, I wondered if you might be able to answer that one.
Yeah, again, it's the online, I think online option is really good. And I've in the past used Groupon for things like that, because they do quite a nice, you know, baby children experience types things. So you've not got to physically go and buy something. So just again, it's I think like what Angela said, you know, it's about reframing. And I often find around Christmas and children, it's not often the babies that are difficult. Sometimes it's the family and the adults and the dynamics and how that's changed, and the focus and the baby talk that's the difficult things. So yeah, it goes back to, you know, remembering and just keeping things simple. It could be that, you know, you just want to give like a nice little gift card or something like that, rather than going out and having to buy clothes or baby toys or things like that. So again, thinking about what options you do have in that situation.
Thanks, that's really good suggestions. I particularly like the gift card one, because then you don't really need to have anything to do with it at all, do you? Which is probably a really good way of dealing with it. Another one, I think, for you, perhaps, Angela, from someone who says that they haven't told their family about their journey, which is 18 months in, but will be with them for the holidays. Do you generally advise telling them something? They felt it would only add to the pressure and don't want to talk about it or get questions for them, but it's getting to the point where it's actually stressful to hide it. And again, I think that's probably a really common thing.
Yeah, I think that this is a common thing, and I think it is really difficult, and I think it is about getting the balance, because there's the old thing about privacy versus secrecy, and I would say that you know your family best, or and you know yourselves best in terms of what support is going to be useful. If by telling your family, do you think they're going to be supportive? Do you know what support you want? Do you want to tell them and then be open to them asking questions whenever they want to ask questions? Or do you want to tell them and advise that you will tell them when you've got something to tell them? It's kind of getting that tricky balance between having family there to support you, but kind of something that's very personal to you as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Could I just add something to that as well? That I think kind of ties into what you said, Angela, is around, deciding to tell or not tell, and then, how much. And I think it always comes back to, and I've now realised from my own journey, it's back to those healthy boundaries. So we can tell family, and then because there's so many different kind of acronyms and it's such a complex thing, you can end up being bombarded with questions. So by saying, we're going through this, it's really tough, I'll let you know when there's something to say, because otherwise it can feel like if you're telling people every date and, everything that's coming up, you've got their expectation and that whole weight of, not letting them down. But that's how I felt, if it didn't work, it was kind of, I'm disappointed for me and I'm disappointed for my family. So it's about those healthy boundaries and telling as much or as little as you want to. And just keeping it safe for yourself so that you're not constantly being bombarded with questions.
Thanks. I think you've slightly answered our next question there, Kelly, which is around what the advice is for family that ask about how the fertility journey is going, from someone who says they've told their close family about their problems, but them constantly asking about how it's going is draining, and they don't know how to get them to stop, because the person says very rightly, if they didn't have fertility problems, they wouldn't ask about each step of getting pregnant. Angela, would you have any further advice about that one?
Again, excuse me, again, the balance of it, and kind of perhaps depending on the family, whether you feel that you can say something. I think sometimes people want their family and friends to know, but they don't like being invaded with the questions. But they also feel like if they don't tell their family, then they're lying to their family or not being truthful. And it is this tricky balance. And what some people do is tell people, but then are kind of quite loose with dates and scans and such, and let them know that they will tell them when they've got something to tell them. Otherwise, it's kind of like reliving that devastation as well. But I guess I'd also encourage you to think about, if you are going to tell family or not tell family, what response do you want from them? Because again, some people do share with their family and friends, and then nobody asks them how things are going, and that can be equally upsetting.
Another one here from someone who says that they and their husband will be going to see family over Christmas and knows that people will make comments or ask baby-related questions. Can you suggest a polite way of not wanting to discuss anything baby-related? I'll give that one to you, Kelly.
Gosh, there's so many different responses, isn't it? Depending on who it is and what kind of mood you're in. I think it varies. I think, you can, deflect the conversation by saying, it's a bit of a personal question, or, again, I think preempting again some of these questions and planning ahead, thinking what questions might be asked and how might I respond to them. So having like a little bank of responses. So I know that when we'd just recently got married, back in the day, it was like, oh no, not yet. And again, it's just, you need to be ready to say and tell them when you want to, not when when you're feeling pestered. So or no, simply,
I think it's important to feel that you can say the things that you want to say, isn't it? We've got another question here, which I think a lot of people will relate to, as about dealing with pregnancy announcements, and particularly when they come in the next generation down, so cousins, children, people who are half your age virtually. Angela, pregnancy announcements, how do people cope with them?
They're really, really difficult. They feel like kick in the stomach, really. I think the first thing to remember is it's okay to have that gut reaction to those pregnancy announcements. I see, day in, day out, people beating themselves up because they've had a not so pleasant reaction to somebody announcing a pregnancy, or via WhatsApp or directly to their face or text message or social media. So, and kind of think they must be a horrible person because they've had this reaction. So my top tip is to remember you're not alone with that reaction. It's kind of completely natural. It doesn't make you a horrible person. I always say allow time to focus on how you're feeling about it. Give yourself some time to be angry, sad, jealous, whatever the feeling is, but put a time limit on it, whether that's 15 minutes, 3 hours, an whole weekend, you decide. And then come back and reframe it, remembering it's not that pregnancy you want, it's your pregnancy you want. I know that sounds really bizarre, but people do come back and say it's useful to kind of reframe it.
I think that's really helpful, and it's something that people probably, wouldn't necessarily think of doing themselves without that advice. We have another question here, Kelly, around tips for dealing with the guilt from someone who says they're struggling to give their partner a baby, would just like to be able to talk to them openly about this whole thing and support one another. I wonder if you had any sort of tips about talking perhaps with your partner more openly about things.
Yeah, I think I always share with the patients that I support that, we are, the way that we process things, men and women, if you're in a heterosexual couple, are very different. There's this great little book that I share called Men Are Like Waffles and Women Are Like Spaghetti. And it describes women as being this big bowl of spaghetti that's all intertwined and everything's connected, which people can often relate to. And men have little boxes. So they have a work box and a football box and a sport box. And often these boxes don't mix very well, which I know with my husband working from home, he's in a work box and I try and talk about something else and it just doesn't work very well. So I think, allocating that time and preempting, just saying, could we have a chat later on tonight? Could we go for a walk and have a talk, a drive and have a talk? Often that's side by side rather than face to face is quite useful when people are wanting to share. And often, I know I have different conversations when I'm driving in the car as when we're sat having dinner. So, setting that time aside to have a really good in-depth chat about, what it is, what's going on, asking them to be honest about how they're finding it. Because I often find that men in particular say, they're trying to be strong, for their partner, and they feel like they have to, kind of man up and they don't want to share. But more and more, I'd say in the last 2 or 3 years, and since I've been doing the support and the online support events and walk and talks, I have more guys coming along that are more, open, and they talk, and I think it's becoming more normalized that actually, it is difficult. It's difficult for both of us. So I'd also say, open up that conversation, but also, pointing them towards, if it is a male, and the male support groups that Fertility at Work run, and there's so many other Instagram accounts. Again, just so they feel that this isn't something to be ashamed of, and that if they can hear the guys talking about it, whether that's on a documentary, Rod Gilbert, then hopefully they'll open up and feel that they're not alone. I think that's the key thing, is knowing that they're not the only ones going through this.
Thanks. I think that's really important. And our Infertility group is absolutely brilliant for everyone who wants to know any more about that. If you want to go, if your partner wants to go, it meets once a month. And I think for a lot of men, it's really transformed the way they're able to think about the whole thing. We have another question here. Angela, what would you suggest is the best thing to do if it all becomes too much while visiting friends or family who may not know of our journey? They ask if they can get away with hiding in the loo, which I think is what a lot of people actually feel like doing at some points during those kind of family events.
Yeah, I mean, it's, whoever's asked this question, it's great that you're already thinking about this and kind of you're thinking about your own coping strategies that you may be able to adapt. I mean, would it be suitable to, you just need to go out and get some fresh air for 5 minutes, 10 minutes with another family member, by yourself? That seems perfectly plausible to me. I don't know about yourselves, Kate and Kelly, whether if somebody at Christmas time said they just needed 5 minutes to get some fresh air, you know, without that raising suspicion.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think one of the other things is that, you know, if you're going to a family event, you don't actually always need to go to the whole thing. It's perfectly fine if you want to go for part of the time, or say you can only go for a bit or something. And that can often make those kind of things a lot more bearable, because you've got a lot less time to deal with. And in your head, you know that you haven't got to be there for that much longer, which can be helpful. And we have another question here from someone who says they have major guilt about not being able to give their parents a grandchild, especially as their dad is unwell, and finds it overwhelming to think about, and is worried about spending time with them this Christmas. Kelly, I wondered if you had any thoughts about that at all.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult one. If there are no grandchildren, it's an identity like motherhood that we kind of assume we'll have. So again, it goes back to that self-care, self-compassion. You know, you're doing everything that you can to try and have that baby, and it's for you. You know, that's what it's about. So you can have your family, but I understand it. You know, you do want to give your parents grandchildren too. But even, you know, sharing with them how you're feeling about it, and just say, you know, I feel however it is, you know, just being, you know, I'm upset about it, and having that open conversation. Because they are a joy. But I know that, you know, having other people around and puppies and things like that, you know, that can be, you know, a joy too. So I think it's just about, you know, being, you know, kind to yourself really, and recognizing that you are doing everything that you possibly can, and that isn't guilt that you should be holding inside. It's but it is a really difficult one to deal with.
Angela, I just wanted to come back to you about the whole guilt thing, guilt about parents, and guilt about partners as well. I wondered if you had anything to add about that.
Yeah, I think with this particular question that Kelly's just been answering with parents, I think, you know, part of that is about your guilt and your desire to give parents a grandchild. And quite often, I know not always, like some parents do, but quite often the parents want their children to be happy and wouldn't want to know their child is going through so much guilt or pain to provide a grandchild. The question earlier that came in about feeling guilty that they couldn't give their partner a child, I think what I wanted to raise from that is that, again, my favourite word at the moment is reframing. But I think what I wanted to raise is to really encourage people to remember that infertility is a disease. This isn't something that any of us have any control over. And again, that being kind to yourself, why are you carrying that guilt? And if this was a different diagnosis, if this was an oncology diagnosis, would you still have that same level of guilt? And the likelihood is you wouldn't. So what makes it different when it's a fertility related disease?
That's such an important point, actually, and I think that fits with so many things around infertility. If it was anything else, we feel a lot of the things that people do end up feeling about it. I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind, actually. And we have another question here from someone who says they find it very hard at the end of the year, and New Year's particularly difficult. And do you have any tips on trying to be positive for the new year? Kelly, I'll come to you on that first, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's really useful at the end of the year just to have that time to really reflect on, you know, the years that's gone past, and then thinking about kind of the next year. But also something that I share as one of my NLP tools is the Wheel of Life. So I know for me that when I was going through the fertility journey, it very much became Project Baby. So it was all about trying to get pregnant. And I forgot all the other segments on like a little pizza, you know, exercise, friends, and all those things that we, you know, that bring us joy, that fulfill our lives in so many different ways. So going back to something like that can be really, really useful. So if you just put Wheel of Life on Google, you get like the little template that comes up, and you can just plot in, you know, small things that you can do in the different areas of our life, because we often forget to do those things when we're in the midst of all this and it's all consuming. We can forget to do those things that we actually really love and, you know, enjoy doing. So reminding ourselves of, you know, what life was like before all this started, and what we, obviously there's certain things we can't do, but there's a lot we can do. So again, it's trying to focus on the things you can control. And I find, you know, the people that have been on this journey a little while, and it's kind of another year that it's not happened, is having a plan, trying to have a plan in place in terms of, you know, what's coming up, if there's any of the tests that you may be having, and then thinking about trying to plan some non-fertility events in the diary, because a lot of people don't move house, don't move jobs, don't book holidays just in case they're pregnant. So, you know, do that anyway, and plan some lovely things in the diary anyway, and then when it happens, if it happens, let it happen. And, you know, at least you've got those things in the diary, because when we take all that away, it can be really, really challenging.
Thanks, Angela. I wondered if you'd have anything else to add about kind of thinking about a new year and how to cope with that.
Yeah, I think again it is really difficult, because people do come, you know, towards Christmas, towards there's like this magical element about Christmas that people dread, and then straight after Christmas it's kind of the end of that year and kind of the reflection on the past year, like Kelly said, another year without a baby. And then there seems to be a shift for many people where, oh, new year, this is going to be our year, where, you know, we're going to start treatment or we're going to have another cycle. Personally, I still feel it's about balance, because if you go into the new year positive, for me it's like New Year resolutions. If you know, many people start new year resolutions at the beginning of the year, and by the end of January are totally flat and down. And I just feel if you go into the new year all positive, that this is going to be your year with treatment, the year you have a child, the year everything runs smoothly, as soon as there's a setback, it's going to bring you straight back down. So there's something about balance, and a bit like Kelly was saying with the wheel and such. I think it's really important to remember that being childless doesn't define you as a person. You have so many qualities about you, and it is not all about being a mum or a father. Just that being childless does not have to define you at Christmas time or going into the new year.
Thank you. And I think that's a really, really good point on which to close this evening, to remember that. And I hope that everyone will be able to. I wanted to thank you both so much, Angela and Kelly, for taking part in our webinar this evening. And thank you to everyone else who's joined us in the audience as well. I hope that you all found it helpful and informative too. Just to remind you that the webinar recording will be on the webinars page of the website within the next few days. And also, finally, don't forget that Fertility Network is your charity. We're here for you. Everything we offer is completely free of charge. We've got a wide range of support groups right across the UK, so do get in touch with us if we can help. In the meantime, happy Christmas to all of you, and our very best wishes to you all for the new year. So thank you and good evening.